One rounded edge. That is often the entire difference between a hen who stays sound on her feet for 6 or 7 years and one who ends up limping across the run by her second summer. I have watched more good layers pulled out of a flock over a swollen foot pad than almost any other single cause. Nearly every time the actual root of it traces back to something the keeper walked past every single day without ever once suspecting it. The condition itself is called bumblefoot. It starts smaller than most people expect. A tiny break in the skin on the bottom of a foot pad, sometimes no bigger than a pinprick, is where this whole thing begins. Ordinary bacteria that live on every perch and every patch of ground get down into tissue that was never meant to be exposed. The bird's own body responds by walling that infection off. What you eventually see as a hard swollen lump is actually a defence mechanism that has already been quietly working for weeks before anyone noticed a thing. By the time a limp is visible to the naked eye, the underlying problem has usually been building for a month or more. That is the part that catches new keepers off guard every single time. This is never a sudden event. It is the slow, cumulative result of ordinary daily habits stacking up against a foot that never gets a real day off. Every single one of the 7 habits below is something almost every keeper does without a second thought. Number 1, square-edged or flat-topped roost bars. A chicken's foot was built to wrap around a rounded branch, spreading her body weight evenly across the whole pad and every toe at once. A flatboard or a square-cut 2x4 does the opposite. It concentrates her entire weight onto 2 narrow lines running along each edge, night after night, for years on end. Round over every roost edge with a hand plane, or simply flip a square board so a rounded edge faces upward. That single change removes one of the most consistent pressure points in the whole co-op. This costs nothing beyond an hour with a sander, and it's very often the single highest impact fix on this entire list. The detail worth remembering here: a roost that feels perfectly smooth to your own palm can still be a genuine problem. Human skin is nowhere near as sensitive to concentrated pressure as the underside of a bird's foot after 8 straight hours standing on the same narrow line. Number 2, roosts set too high for the birds actually using them. A heavier breed jumping down from a roost set 5 or 6 feet up hits the ground with real force, concentrated through 2 small foot pads every single morning of her life. That impact alone can be enough to open the exact kind of tiny break in the skin that starts this whole chain reaction, especially onto hard-packed dirt or bare wood. Keep roosts closer to 2 or 3 feet for standard breeds. Add a stepped series of lower perches leading up to the main roost for anything heavier, so nobody is making one long drop first thing every morning. Cost-wise, this one runs close to nothing. A second roost bar mounted a foot lower, or a sturdy wooden step in between, is scrap lumber and 20 minutes of your time. Number 3, hard, unforgiving ground directly under the landing zone. Even a perfectly reasonable roost height still delivers real impact. If the surface underneath is bare dirt, concrete or thin bedding over plywood, a thick layer of soft bedding directly beneath the roost absorbs a genuinely meaningful amount of that daily landing force. Aim for 4 to 6 inches deep in that one specific spot, even if the rest of the floor runs shallower. Check that spot specifically, not just the general bedding depth across the whole coop. This is the 1 square foot that actually matters most, and it is very often the 1 square foot a keeper never thinks to check separately. Number 4, wet, dirty bedding sitting for too long between changes. Damp bedding does 2 things at once, and both work against a hen's feet. It softens the pad itself, making the outer layer more fragile and easier to break. It also becomes a genuinely dense growing ground for the exact bacteria responsible for this whole condition in the first place. Bedding that stays damp underfoot for more than a day or two after any spill or heavy rain tracked in is worth changing early rather than waiting for the regular schedule. Reach down and press your palm flatter against the bedding near the roost. If it feels cool and damp rather than dry, that spot needs attention today, not next weekend. Sand and deeply litter shavings behave differently here, and it is worth knowing which one you are actually running. Sand drains fast and rarely stays damp for long, which works in your favour, though it can pack down hard enough over time that it starts to work against you the way bare ground would. Shavings hold warmth well through winter, but soak through faster than most keepers expect. A genuinely heavy rain, finding its way in through a gap in the roofline, can undo a week of otherwise dry bedding in a single afternoon. Check that spot again after any storm rather than assuming it held. Number 5. Overweight birds carrying more pressure through every single step. A hen who free feeds on scratch grain and kitchen treats all day on top of a full ration of layer feed is putting meaningfully more pressure through those exact same 2 small foot pads. Every step and every landing carries a little more weight than it should. Keep treats to roughly 10% of the daily diet at most. Measure the actual feed ration rather than leaving it out free choice all day for a flock that's not working particularly hard for its calories. A leaner, properly conditioned hen carries real measurable protection in her feet that a heavier one simply does not have. That protection costs you nothing beyond a little discipline with the treat bucket. Heavier breeds carry this risk more than most, and it's worth knowing your own flock's makeup honestly. Orpingtons, Brahmas and Jersey Giants all run considerably heavier than a standard layer breed. Heavily feathered feet on a Cochan or a silky trap moisture against the pad on top of the extra weight, which stacks 2 separate risks onto the same bird. None of that means avoid these breeds. It means watch them a little more closely than you would a lighter bird and check under that feathering specifically rather than trusting a glance from above. Number 6. Sharp or protruding hazards left in the run. Old fencing staples that have worked loose, the cut end of hardware cloth along a run edge, a broken piece of gravel, or a splinter standing proud on an old board are all genuinely common causes here. Any one of them can open the exact tiny break in the skin that starts this entire condition. Walk your run on your hands and knees once a season, at roughly the same eye level a hen actually experiences it from. Run a bare hand flat across every surface a foot might land on. You will find things standing that you would never have noticed simply walking through upright, and every single one you remove is one less way in for this condition. Number 7, waiting to check because yesterday she looked completely fine. This is genuinely the most common habit on the whole list, and it's the one that turns a small, easily managed problem into a real one. A slight favouring of one foot, a bird standing more than usual instead of walking around freely, or simply seeming a touch less active than her flockmates are all early signals. Most keepers explain these away as a bad landing or a passing off day. Catching this at the earliest stage makes all the difference. It is genuinely the gap between something you notice and correct in a week and something that needs real intervention from an experienced keeper or a vet. The difference comes down to whether it is caught while still small and soft, rather than after it has gone hard and established. Waiting even a further 2 or 3 weeks past that first hesitation is consistently when a manageable case turns into an established one. That short window is usually the entire difference in how the whole thing ends. Here is what you can actually do tonight, regardless of which of these 7 applies to your own flock. Pick up each hen currently in your flock and gently turn her over. Look closely at the centre of each foot pad for any dark spot, any swelling or any place that looks different from its opposite foot. This takes roughly 30 seconds per bird. It's genuinely the single most reliable early warning system available to any keeper, well before a limp ever becomes visible from across the run. Here is a simple monthly routine worth building into your regular flock care alongside that weekly foot check. Once a month, run your hand along every roost bar, checking specifically for any edge sharp enough to leave a mark on your own palm. What feels merely firm to a human hand can still be a genuine pressure point once it's concentrated onto a much smaller foot. Once a season, walk the entire run at ground level the way described above. Any time bedding gets wet from a spill, a leaking waterer, or heavy weather tracked in, treat that as worth addressing the same day rather than waiting for the next scheduled change. If you do find a swelling that looks established, that is the point to bring in an experienced keeper or a vet rather than attempting anything at home yourself. Established means firm, clearly defined, and larger than a simple bruise would explain. Early, soft, barely there swelling often resolves on its own with nothing more than the environmental fixes covered here today. Anything harder, larger, or accompanied by real lameness deserves a proper look from somebody with actual hands, on experience treating it. Getting this wrong at home tends to make the underlying problem considerably worse rather than better. It can turn a 2-week fix into a 2-month one. A 2-month one, left further still, becomes a genuine vet bill running well past what a whole season of prevention would ever have cost you in roost lumber and clean bedding. I want to mention one thing that surprises almost every keeper the first time they hear it. The birds most likely to end up dealing with this are consistently your best layers and your heaviest, most productive breeds, not the flighty bantams darting around at the edges of the flock. The very birds carrying the most weight and the most daily activity are exactly the ones putting the most cumulative pressure through those 2 small foot pads. That means your most valuable hen is very often also your most exposed one and worth the extra 30 seconds of attention precisely because of how much she carries for the flock. There is also a seasonal pattern worth knowing. Wet spring weather and the driest weeks of summer both raise the odds of this condition, though for entirely different reasons. Spring keeps bedding damp for longer between changes even when you are staying on top of your normal schedule. Late summer tends to dry hard-packed ground into a surface with almost no give at all under a landing foot. That is exactly why checking roost height and ground softness together matters more in August than it does in April. A weight check is worth folding into that same monthly routine. Pick up each hen and get a rough sense of her condition by feel along the breastbone, the same way you would check any animal you are responsible for. A hen who feels noticeably heavier than she did a season ago without a clear reason, like an upcoming molt, is a hen worth watching more closely for exactly this reason. Drainage around the run matters more here than most keepers ever consider. A low spot that holds standing water after every rain keeps the ground soft and dark for days at a time. That same soft dark ground is exactly where bacteria persist longest between one bird's visit and the next. A few wheelbarrows of gravel or sand worked into the lowest corner of a run does more for foot health over a full year than almost anything else on this list. That is usually the one corner that never seems to dry out even on a clear day. And the fix simply gives water somewhere to go instead of sitting. Keeping a simple written note through the year builds a genuinely useful record over a season or two. Just a line or two any time you check feet, and anything you noticed is enough. A pattern that is invisible in any single check becomes obvious over time. Which birds tend to favour a foot after wet weather, and which corner of the run stays softest longest both become clear once you can look back across several months of the same notes side by side. If you do ever spot an early swelling, here is the first hour that actually matters. Move that bird to a clean, dry, softly bedded space on her own for a day or two of close observation. Keep her away from the flock's normal pecking order, since other birds will readily target a hen who is already favouring one foot. Note the exact size and firmness so you have something to compare it against a few days later. A swelling that's visibly shrinking on its own tells you something very different than one that's holding steady or growing. If it has not visibly improved within about a week of rest on soft, clean bedding, that is your signal to bring in an experienced keeper or a vet rather than continuing to wait and watch on your own. A week of no real change is long enough to know which direction things are actually heading. I've put together a complete written foot health checklist covering everything on this list in one place. It comes with a simple monthly inspection sheet you can keep pinned inside the coop door and a photo guide showing exactly what an early soft swelling looks like next to a healthy pad for comparison. It's linked below if you want the fuller version to work through at your own pace. None of this replaces an actual hands-on look from somebody experienced if you are ever genuinely unsure what you're looking at. A photograph and a written description only carry a keeper so far. A foot that looks borderline to you is worth a second opinion rather than a guess either way. And the cost of that proper look early on is almost always smaller than the cost of guessing wrong. I have kept birds long enough now to know that almost nothing on this list feels urgent in the moment it is happening. A slightly square roost edge, bedding that stayed damp one extra day, a hen carrying a little more weight than she should. None of it looks like a real problem on any single day you notice it. It is only the accumulation across months and years that turns an ordinary habit into a hen standing awkwardly in the corner of the run, favouring one foot while you try to work out what changed. So tonight, before anything else, pick up every hen you have and look at the bottom of both feet. It costs nothing and it takes less time than filling the waterer. It is genuinely the one habit on this entire list capable of catching every other mistake before any of them ever becomes something a vet needs to see. Start there tonight. Work through the roost edges and the run itself over the coming week, one item at a time, and you will have closed off nearly every ordinary path this condition actually takes into a flock.